There's a number of different possibilities. It could have been comorbidities, the interventions, but it's like, you don't know. That's the thing, is like the developmental trajectories of autism are going to look different for every individual. There's a very important part of the criteria, I feel like that's kind of explains what I'm trying to say, is like traits may be masked until demands exceed limited capacities.
Wow.
So essentially, like, you can have those traits, but things are going to be more obvious or more difficult depending on the situation.
Welcome back to Making It Awkward. I'm Jessica Wilson, dietitian and author of It's Always Been Ours. You can find me on Instagram at jessicawilson.msrg. You can watch video of the show on YouTube, and you can support the show by rating, subscribing, commenting, leaving an Apple Podcast review, and joining the Patreon. You can find awkward merch like the sweatshirt that I'm wearing that says I came, I saw, and made it awkward on my website. Last week, Dr. Teresa Lyons was my guest. She shared what she sees in autism research, and most of both the episode and her business hinge on the idea of losing an autism diagnosis. Today, my guest is Jocelyn, known on social media as AuDHD Academic, to help me look at some autism research. And today's intro has some listener feedback as well. I invited Jocelyn to join the show to break down Dr. Teresa Lyons' claim that 37% of autistic kids can lose their diagnosis.
It is not for everybody. It is not a lifelong diagnosis. And so that was one of the first things that I found was these research publications. Over the decades, there'd be a few, and it would show that, a small percentage. When my daughter was diagnosed, it was about 10% of kids diagnosed with autism lose their diagnosis and go on to have a full life without needing supports. So no speech therapy, no OT, no PT, no, additional supports in school. And so that was just really mind-blowing and really important to have, because you make very different assumptions and expectations when okay, 10%, that's a decent number. And now over the years, the latest research in 2023 shows that that number is actually 37% now.
We get into that study and its limitations, along with topics about disability, why some people may get diagnosed later in their lives, support needs for autistic people, and of course, RFK. I think we need to know more about autism research now as its awareness, acceptance, and advocacy continue to grow. And as I said in the first episode, a study, statistic, or headline can transform a person, a news cycle, a movement, and a political party. Now, there's so much that can be explored from my conversation with Teresa, and the topics of gut health, dysbiosis, and even nightshades can have their own episodes. I also want to know if the term root cause was popularly used before RFK started using it every chance he got. With a bunch of wild directions, you may have been surprised that I opened my episode with Dr. Lyons with my question about conventional versus organic chemicals. I find that this question can tell us a lot about how well people have dug into the research for variables and limitations, or whether or not they're simply comfortable saying whatever feels right to them. So are the conventional pesticides and herbicides worse than the organic pesticides and herbicides, or I don't know?
I would say yes.
Okay.
Definitely. And it depends on the farmer's practice. So I've definitely gone to quite a bit of farms.
So most conventional chemicals are synthetic and viewed by the public as unhealthy. This sentiment is also yelled to us by wellness influencers. And then organic chemicals are supposed to be somehow better for the body. But just because something is organic or natural doesn't mean it's safe. And with organic chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, often more is used to get the same effect. Additionally, the USDA has approved some synthetic fertilizers for use in organic agriculture. So as we've heard Farmer Trampus Harmon say, and what I read in a high schooler's speech about artificial sweeteners, the dose makes the poison. When people say simply and broadly that organic chemicals provide less burden or stress on the body, as Dr. Lyons did, it's a red flag for me. And I hope it is for you as well. Okay, it was great to hear from many of you about last week's episode. I got more than one message that just said, $98, referring to the monthly charge to be a part of Teresa's platform.
The Navigating Autism platform does accept flexible spending. So we try to make this as easy as possible. And it's a low $98 per month fee. And the ordering of the tests, parents pay for that additionally, because parents can order tests for other kids and themselves. And usually one family member starts getting healthy, then they start saying, hey, wait a second.
Some folks mentioned that Teresa didn't mention her daughter in the episode. Before recording, she told me that she doesn't speak about her daughter or any interventions or outcomes she tried with her. You all called out Teresa's claim that autistic kids don't learn to mask until they're in their teens. Do you think that's because the child learns to mask their autism and just learn that, say, it's less traumatic or less severe engagement with adults if they're masking their autism symptoms? Do you think that has anything to do with it?
Not in this case. Certainly not. Okay. Masking is certainly something that occurs. It's usually much older. So teenagers and young adults. And it's overall, the research of losing the diagnosis is not that kids just learn to mask. That's not right.
Laurel specifically pointed out that if indeed kids are learning all along, that it can very well be the case that masking will get their needs met and make things smoother, while also being harmful to them as well. And let me tell you, a quick Google search showed me the research that masking can start early for children. So this is another example of someone using their own beliefs to further their point while making it sound like science. And many of you brought up the portion of the episode where Teresa says that her 3-year-old non-speaking daughter was able to communicate her needs via finger painting. Did you look at your daughter's autism diagnosis as like a problem to be solved, or was it what was the framing for you when you were going through all of this?
Sure. So I actually asked my daughter. So I was doing the research, and, there were, especially back then, people would say, oh, you an autism person, that's just the way they are. That's who they are. And you've got to just let them be. And I was torn. It was like, do I resolve these health issues and change who you are? Is this who you are? Like, who are you, and what is it that I should do? Right? I was a first-time parent, and I still only have one daughter. Right? So what I did was, she was in her high chair, and she was it's around the time of her diagnosis, so around 3.5 or so. Okay. And, not speaking, not pointing, there was not much happiness going on. And so she was in the high chair, and I pulled out this big piece of paper, and I put it on the tabletop there. And then I took finger paints, and I just put drops of paint on that paper. And I said, if this is who you are, I can accept you. I love you regardless. But if you want me to help you, if you want me to do something, then you've got to tell me. And so she took her hand and made some motions, and I'll send you the picture. She made a heart. Aww. So that was my North Star.
And I got to say, I've been sitting with the feelings that comment brought up for me, and they aren't good feelings. One listener said she was horrified by the situation and thought it was manipulative. Another guest told me that a 3-year-old should not be in charge of their own healthcare. Today, Jocelyn has her own interpretations of the situation that I really appreciated. And with that, let's get into the interview. Jocelyn, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Introduce yourself to listeners.
So my name is Jocelyn. On my platform, I'm known as ADHD Academic. I primarily make content focused around autism. I talk about neurodivergence. I like to correct misinformation, talk about research, and just overall, I like to have like an open, safe space.
Yeah. I was sent your reel specifically about what is missing, the limitations that are rarely mentioned in studies about autism, and perfect fit for this 37% of kids who apparently will lose their autism diagnosis. Are you able to walk listeners through just like the general bits of the study?
Yeah, I can. So what the study did was it took kids who were diagnosed with autism around ages 1 to 3 and then reevaluated them later around 5 to 7 to see if they still met the criteria for autism. And these kids also had like a slew of interventions in between these 2 points. So in the end, they found that after testing the sample of kids, 37% of them no longer met the criteria by the time they were at school age.
Mm-hmm. And did the same researcher interview like all 200 plus of them reevaluating?
So the sample itself, which I thought was really interesting, the sample is 213, which I thought was about a pretty decent sample, but only included 36 girls and 177 boys. And that tends to happen a lot with autism research. So it is very unfortunate how girls are still very rarely included. So they actually do give you like information on the evaluation. So when the kids were originally evaluated, they were evaluated by like a group of people. So like developmental pediatricians, psychologists. So they were evaluated by like a group, and it was eventually determined, and they were diagnosed as being autistic. When it came to the study's reevaluation, it was a lot of different like measures. So stuff like the ADOS, the ADIR, so like autism diagnostic testing. Okay. And they were all evaluated by one experienced psychologist. And essentially that psychologist rated them on a scale of about 1 to 5 on how certain they were a child would either maintain their diagnosis or if they would no longer meet the criteria.
Mm-hmm. So what did you think about those like baseline and follow-up measures?
I mean, they did a very big slew of measures. So considering the measures they used and the clinician they used, it was just a very well-educated guess based on the information they were given. Now, I wouldn't say that's something to take lightly, but I do want to say that it is important to know that. So like, there was a lot of measures, a very long list of them. And this one psychologist basically saying, hey, I'm certain this person will keep their diagnosis and they will continue to meet the criteria, or I'm certain or uncertain this person might lose it.
1 to 5.
Yep. So yeah, just like in terms of certainty.
Yeah. You mentioned the sex of the sample there.
Yeah. So basically they found that it was girls were more likely to like have what they referred to as non-persistent autism or like possibly losing their diagnoses. So yeah, it was girls who are more likely to have that. And initially they kind of just talk about how that's likely because girls tend to present with subtler symptoms. They do mention like societal expectations, how girls are like kind of like we're expected to like adapt more or like care about other people's feelings, how we have those like expectations that girls are like that are pushed on us more. So that was also like a thing that like it could be because of this or because of just subtler traits or because girls might have like decreasing traits over time. So I'm wondering like how much bias actually went into that when it comes to girls. Masking was not mentioned, but I also want to say that might be because this is like a younger group of kids, but masking is also a possibility I would consider.
Thank you for mentioning that, especially. Teresa, Dr. Lyons said that like these kids were going to lose their diagnosis in about 2 years. And it's like there is nothing in the study that said that.
Because saying a kid will lose their diagnosis for sure is more, at least the way I interpret it, is more of an implication than anything. It's just saying that from this age to this age, this amount of kids no longer meet the criteria. And that can mean a number of different things for so many reasons. It can mean there was an initial misdiagnosis. You could also, the study didn't find really any correlations between the interventions, but it could mean that the interventions had an effect. They also consider the fact that the kids who were diagnosed just had a different developmental trajectory that gave this result. So it's like, there's no 100% way to kind of say that, oh, these kids either outgrew autism or they were just never autistic in the first place, because there's a lot of different factors that you can attribute that to.
Right. And so she was basing a lot of her work, money, income on helping kids be part of that 37%. And I thought that was like misleading and perhaps irresponsible to be telling parents that she can offer this type of quote hope for their kids?
Yeah, it's like when looking at the research, and basically ultimately it is referred to as optimal outcomes, there is quite a rabbit hole of research. So I wasn't able to dig into everything, but it's like it doesn't seem to be the most common thing. But considering what I know about autistic people when it comes to research and a bunch of other factors, even the research itself mentions that there are still difficulties that this 37% can and do have, even if it's not even if they still can measure up to like typical development, they might still have difficulties. They might still have difficulties like associated with autism, with like other comorbidities like ADHD, but it's not a very common thing. And a lot of the research isn't even that like, it's recent, but not too recent. So the study she was talking about was done in 2023, and a lot of them seem to have happened in like the late 2010s. So not as recently, but it's like, I personally would consider it irresponsible because I don't think losing an autism diagnosis is a good thing. Because, like, even if a person doesn't need major supports, they can still get those minor supports, those minimal supports that they need to continue succeeding.
So when it comes to language like optimal outcome and lose their diagnosis, like definitely optimal outcome seems inherently stigmatizing. I'm wondering what you think about that one, but also the idea that somebody can lose their diagnosis.
Optimal outcome, this was like my very first time hearing the term and like learning about it. So I actually am really curious to see what like some of my mutuals may think about that. But it's like, I try to hold multiple perspectives. So I understand from a stigmatizing perspective. And it's like, you just want somebody to conform. You want someone to function in the same way as like a typically developing individual. You like, yeah, it just seems like, oh, the goal is conformity. Once they conform, once they kind of like meet this quota, everything's great. Everything's awesome.
Right.
So there is that, but I can also understand optimal outcome to the extent of like, oh, they're struggling less. They don't need as much support in like a good way, not in the sense of like, oh, we're going to give you less support because you can function just fine. So it's like trying to hold both perspectives. I understand how optimal outcomes can be seen as a good thing because it's like, oh, you're not struggling as much, or you've learned to adapt better, to regulate yourself better, to adjust better on your end. And like basically you've learned how to like advocate and support yourself. But on the other hand, it's like, it's also just like conformity.
Because optimal outcome could be that you got all of the support that you needed. Like that is optimal, right? So
yeah, because a lot of these studies are like about kids who had interventions and stuff like that. So yeah, it could just be you got all the support you needed and you were able to like catch up. It also could just mean that you learned how to mask very well. And even this study in particular literally was like judged based on the child's current functioning. So if you had improved functioning based on those interventions or other factors, it could just be you learned how to mask very well, or that you got the support you needed with those interventions.
And Teresa in the episode agreed that there was no consistent like intervention there. And she was trying to quote, identify like the root causes of autism, and therefore after you've identified that root cause, you can treat that, whether that be like vitamin D deficiency or mold toxicity or lead in the environment. And I could never pull out, she did do the like correlation is not causation, but she would say root cause of autism. And I was thinking like, if you're saying there is a root cause and she is trying to figure out if that root cause is like mold, then what you're saying is that if this child had been exposed to mold, then that is what they developed autism from, which is that what the research is saying? Is there any language that's talking about root cause?
No. It's literally just like I said, it's just kind of like talking about, hey, will these diagnosed kids still meet the criteria later? That's like the main point of this study. And it's like, there's so many possible causes to autism. Like we know genetics are one. We know there are like certain environmental factors that contribute it, but it's like to find one root cause and say, this is what caused autism, and to treat that isn't as straightforward as some people try to make it sound.
Yeah. What are some environmental factors?
Well, it's like, I think like one that I know of off the top of my head is like parental age. So I know that like Like having like a father who's like a bit older could like contribute to autism. That's like a common one that they tend to teach you. There's also just like being born premature or having just like certain difficulties when it comes to like birth and stuff like that. And then obviously just like genetics, everyone knows about genetics. So like if you have an autistic child, your next child there's an increased likelihood of your next child being autistic. Literally just having an autistic person anywhere in your family increases that likelihood. For myself, my sister's autistic. I have quite a few autistic cousins. So it was not surprising when they found out that I was also autistic because it just runs in our family.
Mm-hmm. Are you comfortable sharing at what age you learned you were autistic?
For me, that was only like, I'm currently in my junior year of college. So for me, that was like probably about my senior year of high school, freshman year of college.
And did you find out first or did your sister?
My sister is older than me. So she's in her like late 20s and she got diagnosed as a kid.
Okay.
So I grew up with her my whole life and we are polar opposites in pretty much every way. So because I act nothing like my sister, my mom even like has told me this herself, was like, oh, because you don't act anything like your sister, we didn't think anything was going wrong with you.
Wow. How have you like interpreted and like integrated that information into your brain and concepts about both your autism and autism generally?
Well, it's also just kind of like, for me, it was really just learning that autism looks different. For me, my sister and my younger cousin, they present pretty similarly to each other, and that was what I had always seen. So when it was first brought up to me that I may be autistic, I didn't believe it. It didn't make sense to me. And I was like, no, I don't act like this, or I'm not like this, because it was so different from what I had seen. But learning about it on like a more neutral level, and I'm like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Interesting. How would you describe like a neutral level? Like digging into the research or?
I would say like dig into the research. So like, what does the criteria say? Like, what are the actual criteria for autism that like means it, like that means you're autistic? So social communication difficulties, repetitive behaviors, and then also having like other examples and like talking to people and meeting people who present differently, because most of my friends are also autistic. So seeing something outside of like pretty much like those two presentations was like, oh, this is different than what I expected. And I actually do heavily relate to this. I actually do present with these traits. They just kind of like look different from person to person. It's a big part of the reason why the criteria is written in a very neutral way, because there's more than one way that can present. So like, using like the first one as an example, which is like difficulties in social communication and social interaction, there are so many ways that can present for someone. That can look like someone completely taking over a conversation, butting in, interrupting people, or someone who pretty much doesn't respond to you or will respond to you and then just stop talking.
Yeah. I've seen discourse in popular news media. The conversation had been with moms who were complaining like all of this autism awareness is, you know, negatively impacting my child because nobody is realizing how disabled my child is with like by having autism. And that is wild to me.
So the way the levels, which is how the DSM categorizes it, is level 1, which is requiring support. Level 2 is requiring substantial support. And level 3 is requiring very substantial support. And then a lot of people will use support needs labels. So low support needs, which is typically level 1, moderate support needs, which is usually level 2, and then high support needs, which is usually level 3. So for me, I would be considered low support needs. I really hate that conversation where you have people are like, oh, these people don't need as much support, because it is in reference to other autistic people. So I have low support needs compared to a high or moderate support needs autistic person. However, if you compare me to a non-autistic person, my support needs are actually quite a lot. I need more support than a non-autistic person, but not as much as a high support needs autistic person.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I mean, with cancer, we understand that stage 4 and stage 5 cancer is more concerning than stage 1. It's not like we're like, you don't have cancer, we're not concerned. Like, sorry to compare autism to cancer because it's nothing.
No. It like, I feel like it can be an annoying analogy for some people, but I feel like it's a good way to represent it, in the sense like a lot of people do really, there's a lot of like confliction in that conversation with like, oh, you have people with less support, you have people who need more support. There's a lot of people who want to like break apart the spectrum into like separate diagnoses. But a lot of people don't realize that the differences when it comes to high and low support needs individuals, that's a quantitative difference, not a qualitative one. We have the same traits. We have those difficulties in our communication and socializing. We have those difficulties in repetitive behaviors, but the difference is quantitative in the sense of the differences we are seeing is in the severity of behaviors and how they are going to impact our lives.
Mm-hmm. This is super helpful. I really appreciate this. Going back to that 37% study, some headlines that I was seeing was that this study just means that we should be retesting kids. So not that they would necessarily like lose their diagnosis behaviorally, but like, did we assess them accurately to begin with? Some kids, had anxiety or ADHD diagnoses later on. So again, to take that 37% and say they lost it, but also buy my supplements or take my lab test in a different way, an additional way, seems irresponsible. Like, did they have autism to begin with? I don't know.
Yeah, because there's a number of different possibilities. It could have been comorbidities, the interventions, but it's like, you don't know. That's the thing is like the developmental trajectories of autism are going to look different for every individual. There's a very important part of the criteria. I feel like that's kind of explains what I'm trying to say is like traits may be masked until demands exceed limited capacities.
Wow.
So essentially, like, you can have those traits, but things are going to be more obvious or more difficult depending on the situation. I relate to this bit of the criteria so much because, like, I also have ADHD, and I feel like that's probably one of the most relatable things, despite being in the autism criteria. But I've had these traits my entire life. My parents knew about it. I knew about it. Everyone knew about it because I've had these like struggles my whole life. But as I got older, especially when I got into high school and I got into college, they started to have a much bigger impact because there was a much higher demand placed on me. I didn't have these like strict deadlines in elementary school. I didn't have to worry about like flunking out or failing out in the same way. But in college and high school where there's like where there's like just stricter assignments, deadlines, rules, I didn't have as much room. So because the demands are so high, I was struggling to meet them a lot more than I used to.
Wow.
So for these kids who are younger, they might be in an optimal environment to suit their needs. But as they get older, as they experience different things, they might enter spaces and enter environments and situations where the demands placed on them exceed those capacities. So it's like, oh, I learned how to cope in this situation. But as they get older, as things get more difficult, those are definitely things that can and most likely will happen, at least in my opinion.
Interesting. And then so the parents thinking that they cured their autistic kid or ended up with an optimal outcome or they lost their diagnosis with whatever interventions that Teresa Lyons has them doing, like if they were a parent invested in like this problem solving language at however age, kids later on could return to or regain their autism diagnosis. And I think about parents and how much pressure or shame perhaps or despair they may feel with perhaps failing to keep their kids autism free or something like that. I don't know. I'm just thinking as you're talking about how like so much of this seems like problematizing language rather than just having a kid and accepting who your kid is. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like, because there's so many different possibilities. Like, in my opinion, odds are if this, especially in such a short time frame, if a kid is going to lose their diagnosis, there is a good possibility they were never autistic to begin with, or that there are other factors at play. But it like, someone losing their diagnoses does not sit right with me, especially when people fought so hard for others to understand that autism isn't something you grow out of. It's not something that can be cured or fixed. And especially for people who are lower support needs or labeled as high functioning, it's important to know that because like we still have struggles. We are still disabled and we still need support, even though people don't think we do.
Yeah. Language wise and disability wise, a lot of people will both look at people with autism, but other people with invisible disabilities and say, like, you're not actually disabled. Like, I don't see a mobility device or something like that. Are you able to speak to any of the disability justice or disability language with autism?
Well, it's honestly probably one of the most annoying things about existing in autism spaces is somehow the fact that autism is a disability, which it is somehow one of the most controversial things you can say.
Oh.
Because you have so many people who have this like toxic positivity towards autism where they're like, it's a superpower, it's great, we're better than neurotypical people. Or you have like this certain subset of that known as like Aspie supremacy, where you have lower support needs autistic people in particular kind of being like, oh, I'm not like those autistic people, and just that sense of superiority. But it's like, the language that should be used, autism is a disability, and I personally view disability as being neutral. Disability is not a bad thing. It is not a bad word. It just is. And that does need to be acknowledged. Like, we as autistic people do have these struggles and these difficulties at all support needs. We are disabled. We do not meet that norm. We cannot, it's so hard to like put, but like autism is a disability, and I feel like that should not ever be controversial to say.
Yeah, I always think of disability like in the context of society, like society is the disabling factor. The reason that folks end up disabled is because society oftentimes is not able to accommodate needs. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, even then, that's also something that tends to be like have conflict as well. So I do understand, like, but the thing is, like, a lot of people tend to misunderstand the social model of disability. So, like, yes, the idea and the concept is that, yes, society is disabling. I am never going to deny that. It 100% is. There are needs that society should be meeting that they are not. However, I fundamentally reject the idea that society is the cause of disability. So while society definitely, for me personally, and for a lot of other autistic people will tell you exactly the same, while society makes living life harder, it makes things more difficult than it already is, I would still be disabled even if society didn't exist, or even if society were perfectly accommodating, I would still have struggles that society can't fix or that society can't accommodate.
Got it. Super helpful. Do you want to share anything about the Tylenol of it all? No pressure to do so.
I think the only thing I could really say about that is just like, man, I hate RFK. But like even more recently, he just outwardly said like, oh, we don't have enough evidence to say that Tylenol causes autism. Like he just outright said it. And it's like, yeah. And it's like, I feel like the Tylenol thing is actually really interesting, specifically in the fact it has shown me so much how many people will appeal to authority just off the bat, and how many people don't know how research works.
Both. The appeal to authority in here reminds me or makes me think of all the Make America Healthy Again, like stans who previous to this or were discussing vaccines and so many other reasons that either their kids or other kids have autism. And then RFK just like blows in with Tylenol and they have to adjust or stop talking about vaccines in the same way was one thing that I saw.
For me, the appeal to authority is the amount of people who kept saying, oh, but this, because the big study that a lot of people were citing when it came to the Tylenol thing was a study that came out of Harvard. And everybody's like, oh, but the study came from Harvard. The study came from Harvard. And it's hailed as such this like very big accredited like institution that people are like, oh, well, it's from Harvard. We have to listen. Or it must be like this perfect study that tells us everything we need to know. And it's like, number one, that was a literature review. So they didn't actually do any of the research themselves. They compiled all of the research that's already been done and then came to a conclusion based on that. And then ultimately, even that study found that, hey, there is a correlation, but once again, correlation does not equal causation. And they're like, yeah, no, we can't say that Tylenol causes autism because, yeah, we could say there's a positive correlation, but that's it.
Yeah. And then some folks who are more, quote, holistic came in and were like, yeah, even if it's not the Tylenol, it's the fevers and all of these other things. And I'm like, you're still on the same train of Tylenol, you're just calling it something else. I don't know. Interesting. Oh, you said appeal to authority and...
Oh, yeah, people not knowing how to read research. Just like a lot of people don't know the difference between like, oh, this is a research study and this is a lit review. And they are both like brands of research, but I feel like it's important to know what those differences are. Because I've written a lit review before, but like doing a study and having a lit review are two very different things. And the amount of people who are just very much kind of just like, oh, there's a correlation, which means Tylenol causes autism. Correlation does not equal causation. They are not the same thing. Not to mention that a good chunk of those studies were actually focused around ADHD rather than autism. So that was interesting.
Do you think that because when RFK was confirmed, he said, we'll know the cause of autism by April, and they said, scratch that, we'll know it by September. Was Tylenol just the easiest? Or because
I don't know what was going through these people's heads.
The vaccine rhetoric had been out for years. Like, that would have been so easy. But then the press conference says Tylenol. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just like, because I've talked about like RFK since like he started talking about autism, and it's like there's so many problems. There's so many problems with like his rhetoric and everything else, and it's like until I see like I'm like, unless you're gonna give me a study that like gives me some concrete information, I do not believe anything that comes out of that man's mouth.
Zero. At all. Yes, his initial discussions about like kids being able to use the bathroom and play baseball and all those things.
The thing is, though, it's like he's not entirely incorrect, which is like part of the problem. Because if we're talking about this, like on the scale when it comes to autism, there are kids who cannot do those things. The biggest problem with what RFK is saying, at least to me, is how much of his rhetoric focuses around money and like productivity. So he's like, these are kids who will never pay taxes. These are kids who are being affected at the beginning of their lives and the beginning of their productivity. And also talking about how like the economic cost of autism will eventually be in the trillions. He uses so much rhetoric surrounding like money, productivity, just overall contributions to society. And it's like, yeah, tell us what you really care about. Rather than like these people who actually want and need help. Instead, you care about how much it's costing you.
Yes. And I have seen the same thing or heard the same thing from researchers in food insecurity. We want these people to be fed so they can be productive members of society, because kids who aren't fed aren't able to have jobs and do well in school. And it's like, oh, cool. Like that's why we care about this. Wild. Yes. And pronatalism concerns, because you want more people to buy your stuff. I was about to say the other word that starts with S, but we won't. I think it was towards the beginning, you maybe caught it, that she was saying in her personal deep dives in the research, she said, I've got to learn what is the cutting edge of research, because I'm sure you know research to patients takes 20 to 30 years. And so I was not going to wait that amount of time for my daughter, because if she's 5, then she'd be 35. Do you know what that 20 to 30 years is in the first place?
Not really.
No.
Like, I guess you're talking about research. Like, research takes a long time. And I get, like, you might, like, wait for, like, research to come out to give you, like, more definitives. But it's also, like, even then, like, very rarely should you ever take a piece of research and, like, this is 100% fact. This is 100% true. And it's like, this is the information that you have at your disposal at the time. Rather than 100% anything.
Yes. And for listeners, they will know that I've been hugely critical of all of the ultra-processed food rhetoric, because it has been like on a singular study and with no nuance or complexity. And I'm like, we still don't know anything, but now we have all these people screaming and being upset. So yeah, good call. One study is not going to tell us anything, but she can't wait for randomized control trials for something for her daughter. So instead, she's going to rely on like minimal research. It was weird. She was like, I'm not going to rely on gold standard science. I'm going to rely on anecdotal information to find cures for my kid. And that just didn't line up for me.
I can't stand parents like that.
Anything that was in your notes that I hadn't talked about yet?
Not really.
Okay. At the end of the episode, Teresa Lyon said that she was deciding whether or not she would accept her kiddo for who she was. She said that she was going up against the narratives that we're just supposed to accept that our kid has autism. It'll never get better. This is a lifelong illness, disease, problem that my kid is going to have. So I gave my daughter paper and finger paints and asked her if she just wanted me to accept her as who she is, or if she wanted me to like fight and make her healthy. And because her daughter painted a heart, she took that as I want you to make me healthy and do everything you can to basically help me lose my diagnosis. And I was wondering what you think about that.
I would think that a heart means to just love her and accept her for who she is. I don't know why someone would interpret a heart as like heal me, or like fix me. I would say love me for who I am, care about me, and like help me and support me as like just like as my mom. And it's like I can understand challenging the narrative that nothing will change, that nothing will get better. But I will say that autism is a lifelong disability. It's not something that's suddenly going to go away or that you're going to outgrow. But there can be changes and there can be progress and just like new developments, and those might not look the same for one child as it will the next. For some people, that's just learning how to use the bathroom on their own. That's just maybe learning how to communicate in any way outside like verbal, nonverbal, AAC. That progress, that change can be the smallest thing or the biggest thing, depending on who you're looking at. It's a lifelong disability regardless, but there can and is change depending on that person, regardless of whether it's small or big.
I also thought it was a weird like comparison of, let me directly quote her, but if her daughter wanted Teresa to help her, if you want me to do something, then you've got to tell me. Those are the options, like one or the other. It was like, clearly you're asking your daughter, who was non-speaking, I'm not sure if she was nonverbal at the time, like asking your daughter a question that as a 3.5-year-old, like would not be able to answer at all, but taking painting as a sign was wild to me.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting approach.
To parenting. I love that. There you are. I think that is the perfect way to end this. An interesting approach indeed. Jocelyn, thank you so much for coming and talking to me about this.
Thank you so much for having me.
I would love to bring you back in the future, especially if RFK starts talking more nonsense about autism.
He probably will.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure he'll come up with another reason too, because Tylenol probably wasn't good enough for people out there. So I'll bring you back. Thank you. Having Jocelyn on the show was wonderful, and I hope to bring her back. After talking to her, it made it abundantly clear how unethical it is to rely on a single study without mentioning limitations, especially in order to sell one's business. The homepage of autism.net says the latest autism research found that 37% of children with autism lost their diagnosis! ! Wow, that's profound, right? End quote. On her About page, she says to parents of autistic children, when was the last time you smiled? When was the last time you laughed? Really laughed? Does it feel like autism is slowly draining all the joy and fun out of your life? It also says that most doctors say that autism is a lifelong diagnosis, but the truth, scientific truth, is it's not. Your child can heal completely from autism. After talking with Jocelyn, these statements feel both irresponsible and unethical, and I hope people can find this interview with Jocelyn and her social media for support in understanding autism. Until next time, friends, ask clarifying questions and make it awkward. This has been Making It Awkward. I'm Jessica Wilson. You can find me on Instagram at jessicawilson.msrd. You can buy my book, It's Always Been Ours. You can support the show by rating, subscribing, commenting, leaving an Apple Podcast review. You can also buy merch. This episode is edited by Jen Jacobs, who knows to ask questions about research limitations. It's sponsored by the Legacy of Sacramento Outboard Services. And next week is American Thanksgiving. We'll rerun our regrifting episode with Callie and Casey Means.